There is a specific kind of laughter that is not really laughter. It occupies the same acoustic space as genuine amusement, and it uses the same muscles, and it produces in a room the same brief vibration that real laughter produces. But the people who hear it and who have enough experience reading rooms know immediately that what they are hearing is not the laughter of a man who has found something funny. It is the laughter of a man who has found something insufficient. The laughter that says what words would be too direct to say, which is that the thing being discussed does not merit serious engagement, and that the most honest available response to it is the response that signals dismissal without requiring the dismisser to make a formal argument for the dismissal. This is a specific social instrument, and it is a powerful one, and in the wrong room at the wrong moment, directed at the wrong man, it is one of the most effective ways available to produce a consequence that the man using it did not intend and cannot reverse. Once it has been set in motion. Schnorts. Chuck Norris used it on a Saturday afternoon in the spring of 1989 at the Pacific Coast Martial Arts Symposium in Long Beach, California, in a room containing 480 practitioners, instructors, and serious students from disciplines spanning 3 continents, and he directed it at the subject of Steven Seagal's Aikido, and the 480 people in the room went silent in the specific way that rooms go silent when a significant man has said a significant thing, and the significance has not yet finished arriving at all the people it is going to arrive at before the room decides what to do with it. What happened in the 90 minutes after that silence would become the most discussed event in the history of the Pacific Coast Martial Arts Symposium, a gathering that had been running annually since 1981, and that had produced in its 8 years of operation a considerable archive of memorable moments and significant exchanges. None of them were remembered with the consistency and the specificity of that Saturday afternoon. None of them produced the particular quality of education that that afternoon produced. And none of them contained the specific sequence of events that began with laughter and ended with 480 people applauding a man who had not thrown a single strike at full power and had not needed to. The Pacific Coast Martial Arts Symposium was the kind of event that the martial arts world produced in the 1980s with increasing ambition and increasing organizational sophistication as the practice moved from the margins of American physical culture towards something closer to its center. It drew serious people, not the casual practitioners who attended weekend seminars for the certificate, and the experience of being in a room with someone famous. The symposium drew the people who ran schools and trained competitors and thought seriously about the practice as a practice, and who came to Long Beach every spring because the quality of the conversation and the quality of the demonstration were reliably high enough to justify the trip. Clears throat. The 1989 program had been organized around a central theme, which was the question of effectiveness, specifically the question of what distinguished martial arts systems that produced genuine capability from martial arts systems that produced the performance of genuine capability, and how the distinction could be evaluated honestly by practitioners who were inside the systems being evaluated and therefore subject to all the biases that insider knowledge tends to produce. It was an ambitious theme for a symposium program, and the organizing committee had built around it a schedule of panels and demonstrations and open floor discussions that were designed to generate real engagement with the question, rather than the polite agreement that conferences tend to produce when the questions on the program are not actually controversial enough to produce anything else. The theme was controversial enough, the room was the right room for it, and the people on the program were, by and large, the right people to engage with it. Honestly, Chuck was on the afternoon panel. He had been on the symposium program twice before, in 1984 and in 1986, and had on both occasions produced the kind of engagement that serious rooms produce when the person engaging with them is genuinely present and genuinely interested in the conversation, rather than performing interest in it. He was 49 years old in the spring of 1989. Walker, Texas Ranger, was 4 years in the future. The film career was in one of its productive middle periods. He had driven down from Los Angeles that morning in the plain, unhurried way he did most things, arriving at the convention center 40 minutes before the afternoon session was scheduled to begin, shaking hands with the people he knew, sitting quietly with a cup of coffee near the back of the main hall while the morning's final demonstration finished. Snorts. He was wearing dark slacks and a plain blue shirt and the sport coat he wore to events that required a sport coat. And he looked the way he always looked in rooms full of martial artists, which was completely at ease in a way that was not the ease of a man who has decided in advance that nothing in the room can challenge him, but the ease of a man who has been inside the practice long enough that the practice itself is the most comfortable thing he knows, and any room that contains it feels familiar regardless of its other variables. Steven Seagal was not on the program. He had not been invited to participate in the 1989 symposium, a fact that various people connected to the organizing committee attributed to various causes depending on who was doing the attributing, but that most of the senior people in the room understood as the straightforward consequence of the symposium's program committee making a judgment about what the afternoon's theme required, which was participants who were willing to engage with the question of effectiveness from a position of genuine uncertainty, rather than from the position of a man who had already decided that his own system was the answer to the question, and that the panel's function was therefore to confirm the conclusion rather than to examine it. Seagal had been in Los Angeles for 3 years by the spring of 1989. Above the Law had been in theaters for a year. Hard to Kill was in production. His name was in the conversation in the specific way that a man's name enters a conversation when the conversation is about martial arts, and he has recently become the most visible practitioner in the country with the largest platform for his views on the subject. His views on the subject were well known. Clears throat. They were well known because he had been expressing them consistently and publicly across the previous year on press tours and in interviews and in the various industry contexts where his profile had placed him in rooms with journalists and other practitioners who had asked him questions and received answers that left no interpretive ambiguity about where he stood on the question of Aikido's position in the hierarchy of martial arts systems. The answers placed it at the top of the hierarchy. The answers placed everything else in positions relative to that top, that varied in their distance from it, but were consistently below it. The answers were delivered with the specific certainty of a man who has decided that his expertise in a system is equivalent to an objective evaluation of the system's value relative to all other systems, which is a conclusion that experts in any field tend to reach, and that tends to be most wrong in precisely the fields where the conclusion is expressed with the most confidence. The afternoon session opened with a panel discussion that the program listed as effectiveness and context. What does testing actually tell us? 4 panelists, Chuck at the far left of the table. A Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor named Ferreira, who had competed internationally and had run a school in the San Fernando Valley for 6 years. A Korean-born Tang Soo Do master named Park, who had been teaching in the United States since 1974 and who had produced more national-level competitors from his school than any other instructor in the Western region across the previous decade. And a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had trained in Muay Thai in Thailand for 4 years before returning to the United States to teach, and who was one of perhaps 6 women in the country at that time who could speak about full contact striking from the inside rather than from the outside. The moderator was the symposium's program director, a man named Howard Briggs who had been running these sessions long enough to know that the function of a good moderator was to ask the question that opened the space and then stay out of the space while the people in it filled it with whatever they actually thought. Snorts, Briggs opened with the theme question. He asked the panel to address the gap between a martial arts system's theoretical effectiveness and its demonstrated effectiveness, and specifically to address the question of how a practitioner inside a system could evaluate that gap honestly given the structural incentives toward overestimating the system they had invested years in developing. The question landed in the room, the way good questions land in rooms full of people who have been thinking about the same thing, which is with the specific quality of recognition that a question produces when the people hearing it understand that someone has found the precise formulation for something that had been circulating in the room as a feeling rather than a thought. Ferreira spoke first. He spoke about the role of live rolling in jiu-jitsu, about the specific function of regular practice against fully resisting partners in calibrating a practitioner's understanding of what their technique actually produces versus what they believe it produces. Park spoke about the tournament circuit, about the specific kind of honest feedback that competition provides when the competition is structured around genuine contact and genuine consequences rather than point accumulation under referee management. Okafor spoke about the Muay Thai training culture in Thailand, about the way daily sparring against people who are genuinely trying to hurt you produces a quality of technical honesty that no other training environment replicates. Clears throat. Then Briggs asked the question he had been saving. He asked whether the panel believed that certain martial arts systems had structural features that made honest self-evaluation more difficult for their practitioners. Whether some systems were organized in ways that made it harder for the people inside them to encounter the gap between theoretical and demonstrated effectiveness. It was a pointed question, and the room understood that it was pointed, and the room understood from the specific way that rooms understand things before anyone has said them directly, roughly in what direction the point was aimed. Chuck looked at the table surface for a moment. Then he looked up at the room. Snorts, he said that any system that relied primarily on cooperative partners for its demonstration was a system that created structural difficulty in honest self-evaluation. He said that cooperative demonstration was a legitimate and valuable teaching tool. He said that it was not the same thing as testing. He said that the gap between cooperative demonstration and genuine testing was, in his experience, the most important variable in evaluating any system's practical effectiveness, and that systems which had organized themselves primarily around demonstration rather than testing had created, not deliberately but systematically, an environment in which the practitioner's confidence in the system could expand indefinitely without any mechanism for honest correction. He said all of this in the careful, measured tone of a man making a general observation about a structural problem. He had not named Aikido, he had not named Seagal, he had been speaking in the language of systems and structures rather than the language of specific practitioners. Then Briggs asked a follow-up. He asked Chuck whether he had encountered specific examples of this gap in his own experience with practitioners from various systems. Clear's throat, Chuck paused. He looked at the table for a moment. Then something happened in the corner of his mouth. A small movement. The specific movement of a man who has thought of something that strikes him as genuinely illustrative of the point he has just made, and who is deciding whether the room is the right place to share it. The movement resolved into what the people in the front rows later described as a brief, quiet laugh. Not a performance. Not a theatrical expression of amusement designed to produce a specific effect in the room. A genuine response to a genuine thought that passed across his face in the form of the expression that thoughts produce when they arrive with enough clarity to be immediately and completely funny to the person they arrive in. He said that he had, yes, encountered examples. He said that Aikido was an interesting case. He said that the cooperative structure of Aikido demonstration was so deeply embedded in the practice that the demonstration had in many cases become indistinguishable from the training, and that practitioners who had spent years inside that structure had in some cases developed a confidence in their technique that the cooperative environment had produced, and that the cooperative environment was therefore uniquely unsuited to correct. He said this, and then the corner of his mouth moved again, and he said that he had recently watched a demonstration of high-level Aikido technique performed by a practitioner whose confidence in the system was considerable, and whose demonstration was technically impressive in the specific way that all cooperative demonstrations are impressive, which is completely and exclusively within the conditions the demonstration had been designed to produce. Snorts. The 480 people in the room understood what they were hearing. The front rows understood it first, and the understanding moved backward through the seating in the specific wave that understanding moves through rooms when information arrives that has implications that the people receiving it are already equipped to interpret. Briggs did not follow up immediately. The panel was quiet for a moment, and then from somewhere in the middle section of the seating, a voice said the name, not loudly, not as an accusation or a provocation, simply as a question. As the natural question that the room was already asking silently made audible by one person deciding to make it audible. The voice said, "Are you talking about Seagal?" Clear's throat. Chuck looked in the direction of the voice. He said that he was speaking generally about a structural problem in certain training environments. He said it with the specific quality of a man who has drawn a line at a specific point and intends to hold the line. The room received this with the understanding that the line had been drawn at the point where the comment became attributable rather than the point where the comment became unclear, and that the clarity of what had been said was in no way diminished by the care that had been taken about attribution. The room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when the most significant thing that has been said in the afternoon has just been said and the significance has arrived completely at all 480 people simultaneously. Then a door at the back of the main hall opened. The door opened in the specific way that doors open when the person opening them is not attempting to open them quietly, which is with the complete mechanical operation of a door being opened by a person who has decided that they are going in and is not particularly concerned about the impression the entrance makes. Steven Seagal walked into the Pacific Coast Martial Arts Symposium. Snorts, he was not on the program. He had not been on the program. He had not been in the building at any point in the previous 2 days of the symposium's 3-day schedule. He was 37 years old, 6'4", 230 pounds. He was wearing black in the way he wore black in 1989, which was as a considered statement about the person inside it. He walked down the center aisle with the particular energy of a man who has heard something he was not meant to hear and has decided that the hearing of it changes the operational situation in a way that requires him to be in the room rather than outside it. The 480 people in the room watched him walk down the center aisle with the complete, riveted attention of an audience that has just understood that the afternoon has become something that no program could have scheduled. He reached the front of the room. He looked at the panel table. He looked at Chuck. He said that he had heard his name mentioned. He said it in the controlled voice of a man managing a temperature that is higher than the voice is revealing. He said that if there was something to be said about Aikido or about his practice of it, he was present and willing to hear it said directly rather than indirectly. The room was completely silent. Not the working silence of an audience between program elements. The absolute silence of 480 people who have stopped breathing because they do not want to miss whatever comes next. Clears throat. Chuck looked at Seagal from the panel table with the open, settled expression that the people who had seen him in these moments recognized as the expression of a man who has been in this situation before in various forms and who has arrived through the repetition of being in it at a genuine equanimity about what it requires. He said that he had been making a general observation about training methodologies. He said that the observation was not personal. He said that if Seagal had heard something specific in the observation that he wanted to address, the floor was available and the room was the right room for an honest conversation about the question. He said it in the tone of a man who is offering an invitation that is completely genuine and that the person receiving it should understand is completely genuine before deciding whether to accept it. Seagal looked at the floor. He looked at Chuck. He looked at the 480 people who were looking at him. Something moved through his face in a sequence that several people in the front rows would spend the following years attempting to describe accurately and would consistently describe as three distinct expressions arriving in rapid succession. The first was the expression of a man who is committed to a course of action and is now inside it without any available exit that does not require him to turn around in front of 480 people. The second was the expression of a man doing the rapid internal calculation of what the course of action he is committed to is likely to produce. The third was the expression of a man who has completed the calculation and has arrived at a result and is deciding what to do with the result. Snorts. He walked to the open floor area in front of the panel table. He said that he was happy to demonstrate what Aikido technique looked like against a resisting partner rather than a cooperative one. He said that if anyone on the panel or in the room wanted to test the technique in real conditions, he was prepared to provide those conditions. He gestured toward the open mat area. He said it with the recovered confidence of a man who has made a decision and is executing it and has pushed the calculation's result to somewhere that does not interfere with the execution. Chuck stood up from the panel table. He stood up in the unhurried, deliberate way that he stood up from chairs, removing the sport coat and folding it once and placing it on the back of the chair. He walked to the center of the open mat area in his dark slacks and his plain blue shirt and his dress shoes with his hands loose at his sides and his weight even on both feet and his eyes on Seagal, with the open attention that the 480 people in the room were already, many of them recognizing as the specific quality of attention that meant something was about to happen that would not take long and would not require explanation afterward. Clears throat. Chuck walked back to the panel table. He picked up the sport coat from the back of the chair and put it on. He sat down. He looked at Briggs and said that he thought the demonstration had addressed the question about the gap between cooperative and non-cooperative training environments more thoroughly than anything he could have said about it. He said it without any of the satisfaction that lesser men take from moments like this one. He said it as a genuine observation about the pedagogical value of what had just occurred. Briggs nodded. He said that he thought that was probably right. He looked at his program notes. He said that they still had 40 minutes in the session and asked the panel whether they wanted to continue with the theme question or address what had just happened directly. Snorts. Chuck said that the 63 seconds had been the most direct address of the theme question that the afternoon was likely to produce, and that continuing with the scheduled program seemed like the appropriate response to it. The room still standing laughed, not the specific kind of laughter that had begun the afternoon's most significant sequence. The other kind. The genuine kind. The kind that a room produces when something true has been said about something that the room has just watched together, and the truth of it is as funny as it is complete. They sat back down. The panel continued. Howard Briggs asked the next question on his list. Ferreira answered it. the symposium proceeded with the remaining 40 minutes of its afternoon session in the normal operational manner of a program that has delivered what it promised and has the professional obligation to finish what it started. Outside in the Long Beach afternoon, the door at the back of the main hall remained closed. The light that had come through it in a hard rectangle when Seagal walked out had returned to wherever afternoon light goes when the door it came through closes again. The 480 people inside continued their conversation about effectiveness and testing and the gap between what systems claim to produce and what they actually produce. The afternoon had provided them with the most useful data point on the subject that any of them would encounter that year or possibly that decade. It had arrived in 63 seconds. It had cost nothing except the specific courage of a man willing to walk into a room that was not expecting him and make a claim that the room then tested in the only way that rooms full of serious practitioners test claims, which is directly and without the protection of a cooperative environment and without any variable between the claim and its examination except the mat and the distance, and the 63 seconds that the distance requires to tell the truth.